Thank you very much for coming. My name is Francesco and I'm a nutritional therapist. So at the end of the lecture, if you have any query, you can call me, email me, drop in the office, or just have a look at my website. So today we're going to talk about the role of testing in nutrition, why is it useful, when can it be done, and what are we going to find. And testing, eventually, it's measuring. So we're measuring something. We're measuring fecal matters, we are measuring urine, saliva, and within it, we are measuring metabolites, residual of biochemical processes, or we are measuring bacteria. All of these are important because whenever we have no clear clue what's going on in the body of a patient, with testing we can measure and we can find out at that moment what the body is doing. And we test when there is a genetic pattern and or any imbalances and disease. So somebody has a disease or has a discomfort that runs into families. There is a pattern. That pattern may indicate a genetic blueprint, a genetic starting, but we need to know what's going on exactly. So by making the right choices, using the right test, we can find that out. It's useful in nutritional therapy when you've given the diet, you're given supplements, and the patient is not improving. So you want to understand why he's not improving, what's going on, and how can we rectify our protocols. Testing is useful to confirm and highlight therapy improvements. And especially males seems to be focused on want to improve. And therefore I use that especially with male patients when they don't seem convinced about the therapy, they don't seem convinced about what they're supposed to do. So testing will give them the measurements that they need and possibly the reason why they have to continue the therapy. But also when conventional and nutritional therapy fail to address the root causes of disease, especially in chronic disease, as many of today's diseases are. So these are all the tests that I use, and I use various companies. I don't have any relation with them except the professional use for the benefit of my patients. And what we're going to see today, amongst the thousands of tests that we can run, are the ones that I normally use because they are comprehensive. They can be expensive, but they serve a purpose. They can measure many things at one time, so they could be better value for the client. And also, it reflects 4 or 5 systems in the body which seems to regulate homeostasis. So digestive disturbances, for hormonal imbalances, brain imbalances, adrenal and thyroid. Now, this is the most important slides of the talk, and it seems complicated, it's very easy, but once you understand it, you will understand everything else. So forget what's written on it. Just imagine that something goes into an enzyme. Now enzymes are made by genes. So genes regulate the way the enzymes work, and enzymes are catalysts for biochemical reaction. Because genetics are different and we are unique in our genetic makeup, certain genes may be slow, so they make enzymes which they work slow. And that could be the first sign that there is something not going right in our body. So homocysteine comes in, or a substrate goes into the enzymes makes that biochemical reaction, and something else comes out. It's like when you're making coffee. You put coffee in your coffee machine, and the liquid coffee comes out. You want to think that about as an enzymatic process. And the enzymes, therefore, can be slow if there is one bad copy, 40% reduced, or 70% reduced activity if there are 2 copies of the malfunctioning gene, but not for all genes. There are things that speed up the gene and things that slow it down. And in this example, for example, we have low SAM, which is S-adenosine methionine, a compound which speeds up this enzyme, but we see that acetylaldehyde, TNF-alpha, H2O2, HGPB slow it down. What are those? Environmental effects. TNF-alpha, it's inflammation. So if we have inflammation anywhere in the body, this gene will slow down. If we eat too much sugar, or we drink too much alcohol, the byproduct of those produce toxic substances called acetaldehyde, which slow down that enzymes. And so that gives you an idea that we can already act by reducing the factor that slow down that enzymes to improve our results. And then we have nutrients like zinc, folate, B12, which are called cofactors, which they make that enzyme work. So without those, the enzymes will not work properly, and therefore the result substrate of that process is not what we want. And that can lead eventually to imbalances in the body and bring up disease. The important things about this slide, which already give us the clue of why it's so important to look after your digestion, because zinc, folate, and methylcobalamin are nutrients that you take from your digestive tract, from the food you eat. And each one of us, at some point in our life, we have had digestive issues. Some of us here in this room have chronic issues, even small discomfort. Those are able to change the way our biochemistry works. So there's nothing better than explain to you a digestive test that I use. The beauty about this test, which is in vivo clinicals in the UK, is genetic. So after the fecal sample is collected, it is screened for DNA and then amplified and utilized in its research. That cuts out human mistakes. And you can see about this test that you have pathogens, like Salmonella, for example, viral pathogens like norovirus, adenovirus. You can find the regular gut flora. You can see the one at the top. And generally, it should be within the reference range. However, in this case, this patient had a very high level of certain bacteria, which are part of our gut, therefore they're supposed to be there, and others are very low. That gives an indication that something is going on. Something is disrupting their homeostasis, and we need to understand why. We can see that we have additional dysbiotic bacteria. These are bacteria that come in the gut through foods or the exterior world and do damage, do something, and then they leave. And then we have parasites. And this person had very high level of a couple of parasites. And parasites, they attach themselves in the gut lining, starts to erode the area, create inflammation, tumor necrosis factor or interleukins are produced, and that will imbalance our digestive tract. But this is the best part of this test. It gives you the intestinal function, which measure the digestion. So those two markers seems to be fine, but then you can see secretory IgA, it's low. Now, secretory IgA is a marker of immunity in the gut. It represents how well the immune system is performing in the gut, controlling the homeostasis. Good bacteria, very high, pathogens, very low. The fact that it's very low and it's not very high suggests that this person has been having inflammation, and this parasite and candida, which actually I forgot to tell you here, we have candida, moderate level of candida for a long time. So the immune system no longer has the capability, the nutrients, and the ability to fight infection, and therefore it is very low. Calprotectin, which is a marker, it is the marker that general practitioners use for inflammation, it's very low, which is good. Normally when it's very high, we're talking about irritable bowel disease, like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. So the results, amongst other things, there was an abnormal commensal flora, parasites, candida, norovirus, low secretory IgA. So our protocol, which at the beginning we generally try not to use many supplements, is to reduce carbs because we want to starve those bugs. We want to weaken the bugs that feeds on sugar in order then to be able to eliminate them. We stop every yeast containing food, even the good ones. So even sauerkraut, kombucha, which are healthy foods, they contain yeast, they produce yeast, they ferment. And when you have parasite, or especially candida, that's not a good thing. So even good diet may not be the right diet for you at the moment. because you're having something in your gut, and measuring it with a stool test is a great advantage, because otherwise you're going to keep using certain foods without knowing really what they're doing to you. And in this way, we're moving away from the dichotomy that food can be bad for you. Food almost never is bad for you. It does not work with you because there is an imbalance within you. And that's very important, because you can see many people that certain foods they weren't be able to eat before, after they can tolerate it, simply because things change in the body. We've introduced antimicrobial to kill the bugs, especially Candida and the parasites. And then we increased fiber, green vegetables, and healthy fat, because the good bacteria, they do feed on undigestible fiber, which these green vegetables and food high in fiber give us. This is a beautiful photo of hormones. And hormones are messengers from the body that tells the cell to do certain things. We have different types of hormones. We have sex hormones, we have stress hormones, and sometimes we need to measure them because we need to understand what's going on. And in this case, I had a female patient that had imbalances. Anxiety, depression during the cycle, long cycle, painful cycle. So we want to, and we changed the diet, but we couldn't understand why she was improving. So we run this test, which is more comprehensive. It has cortisol as well, which is a stress hormone, and it has DHEA, which is the master hormone, sex hormones, from where all the other sex hormone comes out. But for the class, I just wanted to point out that if you look at the graphs of progesterone, which is utilized by the body to keep ovulation high, and therefore fertilize the egg fertile for sperm to come in and do the job, progesterone is peak is 1 or 2 days before range, before normal. So that's telling us something is happening there, and we need to understand what. Estrogen levels, as you can see, they rise steadily until day 11 and 12, and generally the peak should be around day 14, but this one, they come early. So although the cycle is 28 days, it may fluctuate throughout. And if you look at this second part of the samples, which are saliva samples, by the way, where sex hormones are best represented, you have peaks of estrogen. Those generally are correlated with stress activity and thyroid lack of modulation, which means that when you're stressed, the thyroid needs to step up, and that may lead to high level of estrogen. Or maybe the patient is using food high in xenoestrogens, which they mimic estrogens and therefore gets very high. However, the PMS are experienced 1 week before the menses, and that explains why estrogen level drops can lead to several issues, especially anxiety. And we will see later why this happens. So what we did was we found out there was very high level of cortisol, progesterone peak was delayed, estrogen peaks was 1 week before menses, and testosterone was very high, which is unusual for a woman, and the DHEA was on very low, which again, it shows that there is a degree of adrenal fatigue going on. And the fact that testosterone is high can tell us that polycystic ovarian syndrome could be on the rise. Again, it's not a clear marker for it, but it gives us an idea that something is happening. And if you experience certain discomforts during the menses, like anxiety, depression, craving, hydration, it is because of the drop of estrogen in the last week before the cycle. So what we did, we used cruciferous vegetables because they're high in certain compounds which help opening the sulfation pathway which detoxify estrogen. So we are targeting using specific nutrients, particular part in the liver that allows for better detoxification. We eat food high in magnesium and vitamin D. They're immunobalancing and help relaxing. Protein with every meal. Now, protein balances blood sugar. And when blood sugar level drop, cortisol rise. So to avoid the cortisol peak, which may influence estrogen production and elimination, by using proteins with every meal, that can help. And many people, especially vegan, tend to have a diet which may not be very well balanced on protein. So for anyone, it's important to have protein with every meal. 3 meals per day, protein with veg, green vegetables, and carbs in it. Mindfulness, relaxation, low sugar diet, and rest are very key for reducing stress and hopefully balancing estrogen levels. Neurotransmitters, brain health. I mean, the brain is a system which it's very complicated. There is a lot of signals going on, a lot of recycling that is happening, and the synapses are working very hard. So we can measure nowadays what's happening in the brain insofar as metabolites of neurotransmitters. So serotonin, once it's been doing what it does, lift our mood across the synapse, then it's degraded, it's eliminated, and it goes into enzymes, which are genetically predetermined. These enzymes break down serotonin, which is no longer used, into an acid. And that's why Dr. Shaw from Great Plains in the US developed this test. It's called the organic acid test, which measure urine metabolites of hormones, digestive markers, mitochondrial activity, and the mitochondria is the power unit of the cell where energy is produced. And you can see here, like you have two acids, 0.6 and 7, arabinose and tartaric acid, which are markers of yeast infection. So this lady had also yeast infection. And having yeast infection means, again, there is an imbalance, the immune system may be involved, stress is on the rise, and things change in the body. We have markers of the Clostridia species. And the Clostridia species is important because it's the one that is always present in the autistic spectrum. I was looking after an autistic child, and we did a stool test, we did an organic acid test, and it showed high level of Clostridia, which is part of our gut, so lives with us, but in autistic kids seems to be very high. And we will see later what it does to our neurotransmitters. And here we measure the metabolites in the urine of our neurotransmitters. So for dopamine, we have vanillic acid. For adrenaline and noradrenaline, we have vanillandelic acid. And then we have 5-hydroxyindolinic A acid, which is for tryptophan. We also have quinolinic and quinolinic acid, which are neurotoxic. So we are able to measure those. And you can see that are within range, but on the low or the high end. So it tells us that there is an imbalance. In fact, this one is the most representative slide of that test. It'll tell us the pathway, what's happening in our brain, how the body is degrading, and what are the results. And measuring those, we have an idea what's going on. So what's going on here is that if you look at tryptophan, which should go on the left-hand side to produce serotonin, and therefore 5-HIAA, which is the organic acid, it's not going to work very well if there is an immune stimulation, stress, or an infection. And it's going to increase neurotoxic acid because the body is trying to protect itself. And to protect itself are to destroy cells which have been infected. Or at least that's the principle behind. So if you have a lot of gut dysbiosis, for example, gut imbalances, and we've seen from this test that there is levels of candida in it, it could be that tryptophan that you get from meat, fish, nuts, and seeds divert its utilization into producing neurotoxic acid. So if that person suffered from loss of memory, that could be an explanation of why this is happening. So the body is infected, and the last things you want is going to do is to use serotonin. It's going to use the raw material to do something else to protect the body. And the same you can see with dopamine. We're eating a turkey, we are eating A chicken, we have tyrosine, which is the amino acid, and it produces dopamine, and that's the organic acid, HPA, which is fine. It seems very good. However, if you look at the other pathway, Clostridium difficile seems to inhibit, so slow down, the enzyme, DBH. And what does DBH? Dopamine into norepinephrine. So the conversion, it is slowed down. So that means that being infected, so having gut imbalances, has a big effect on our neurotransmitters. And now measuring this, and if we had also a stool test for this person, we could actually create a protocol that will deal first with the infection while we are supporting these pathways, and then you will see improvement coming in the moods, cognition, and memory. So what we did was basically we found yeast infection, high quinolinic acids, too high level of good bacteria, and low level of B2, B6, vitamin C, and low-grade inflammation, which is not measurable with C-reactive protein or with calprotectin, but it's there. It's a low-grade burning that is affecting the body. So what we did, we removed all the processed foods, sugars, because they create imbalances in the gut. Eat food with no gluten. Gluten stimulates the immune system, and especially in a child with autism, that's very important. We use protein with every meal to balance blood sugar again, to avoid the peaks of stress that will shift the tryptophan to go into quinolinic acid. We use antimicrobial for yeast infection, so we are treating the gut. The first protocol is looking after the gut. And we supplement vitamin B and vitamin C because delta beta hydroxylase, the cofactor for that enzyme, if you remember the first slide, it's vitamin C. So by adding vitamin C, we are helping that enzymes to work better, and hopefully it's going to produce more norepinephrine and epinephrine. And increase green vegetables. They give you fiber, they give you B vitamins, they're easy to digest. If they are organic, they give you antioxidants that helps the body fighting infections. And now we go to the adrenals. Adrenals are the most used part of the body. We love to get stressed. We get stressed all of the time. But when they're fatigued or when they're tired, well, we suffer. No energy, we can't sleep, we can't perform our activities, we start to crave sugars, then we start to have digestive issues. It's a roller coaster to bad health. So what we're going to do today is show some part of a very good test. Is the Dutch test, which is more comprehensive. It has also metabolites of sex hormones, which can tell us whether they're going the carcinogenic way or not. But today we're going to focus on the adrenals. And you can see from this graph that this patient had very high level of free cortisol, but the metabolized cortisol is very low. So that means that you have a lot of circulating stress hormones, but the production is very low. That tells us that possibly the thyroid is doing something here. And generally, patient with low thyroid level seems to show this sort of pattern. Now, if you do the test of the thyroid and you don't find any issue, well, then it's time for other tests and other laboratory functions. But it's beautiful, it's very well done, this test, and again, it gives you an idea of what's going on. With testing, unfortunately, we cannot have, it's not an exact science, so we cannot get the right therapy or protocol. We can just use them in order to find information that are useful in our therapy. And to conclude, so basically we have reduced sugar, stop stimulant, eat food with protein, use of adaptogenic herbs to help the adrenal relax, and this seemed to have helped the patient over time. To just mop up everything together, I'm just gonna get everything together with genetics. You can measure your genes. $150, no matter what company you're gonna use. You can use any of these, and it's for life. Genes don't change. What it change are the inhibitors, the inducers, and the cofactor. The environment plays a big part in it. So what I've done, I've measured certain enzymes, again, certain enzymes of a process called methylation, which as I speak, it's happening 1,000 times in every single cell in the body. And that regulate and recycle nutrients, neurotransmitters, cardiovascular markers, etc. And if you can see here, the red one, it's 2 bad copies. Plus and minus means a good copy and a bad copy, which translated into numbers is reduced activity. So if you remember the first slide, this one is exactly the same. So if I've taken an example from the test before, dopamine goes into this gene that produces an enzyme called catechol methyltransferase, from which the organic acid should come out. It needs magnesium and SAM to work. However, estrogen and the byproduct of sugar slow it down. That means that 10 days before the cycle, if you stop all the chocolate, sugars-based food, flour-based food, that can help you in reducing, increasing the speed of count activity, and that helps breaking down dopamine much, much better. So it's all here. It's very fast. If you have any question on this, unfortunately, you can email me. And if you have any question now, please ask me. But the idea of testing is about find out information that can help any therapy, whether it's a general practitioner therapy or nutritional therapy. And it gives more strength to actually to the protocol that you're using. Thank you. Is there any questions?
Yes. Just one question. I read a book of many years ago, I think by your blood type, I can't remember the author, but I don't know if you're familiar with it, but has blood type anything to do with what you're eating? Have anything to do with this, whether you're O negative or you're AB or AA or whatever? Has that had any factor, has any inclusion into the process here?
I am not familiar with blood type testing, and therefore I'm really not able to answer your question, but I'll try to find out, and I will let you know.
Because to say, like, for instance, to say negative type blood was the first around, this is according to the theory of the author now. I didn't read any other books, so I can't counter that.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the A came along and then B and all that kind of thing, you know. So, no, I was just wondering.
It could be that they share some genetics, but to be honest, I'm not sure, therefore I don't want to speculate. But if they share some genetics and the blood types correlates to that, then genetics play a part in it. Yeah.
How popular are these testings these days in normal practice?
It's a very good question, and they're not very popular. The medical practice does not perform them, so nutritional therapists, naturopaths do perform them, but the nature of this test, they're not popular because they're expensive. We're talking about over 250 euro for at least each one of these tests, up to 400 or 500, depending on the test. And therefore, patients don't seem to be inclined too much to spend that money. You're going to nutritional therapists, you're not a doctor, and therefore there is a bit of skepticism. However, once the therapy is going and we see that it's not working, generally the patients accept that. But they're not very popular, they're not promoted. They're all private labs, so you can contact them directly and access their information and can do the test with them. But then they won't give interpretation, so you have to find somebody that will interpret it for you. Yeah.
When you send off the genetic samples, can you do that anonymously? Like, I know you know who it is, but is it a number that goes, or is there identifiable information goes with it?
Well, you subscribe with your name, and a number is generated as a result from your application, and that number will be used ever since.
So if I went to you and you were sending my samples to a lab for genetic testing, would that lab know that I was whatever age, gender, whatever?
Yes, they would. And those tests, again, I don't perform the test, so that would be that you will I can arrange that, but you will give the blood and then the report will come back to me. I will interpret it based on the symptoms, because all these tests have been interpreted with the symptoms. If I don't have any digestive problem, well, and the test shows that there is something, maybe there is nothing. It's just a normal working gut that has up and downs, but it's not creating any issues. So symptoms are key. If you have low fatigue and you have adrenal issues, then the adrenal test may tell you or not whether you need support, but not always it will really reflect your status. So it's just a measurement that we're doing at the moment. Yeah?
On one of your early screens you had methylcobalamin.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right in thinking that's a form of B12?
Yes. You see, B12 comes in various forms, depending on the needs. Methylcobalamin is for methylation. Hydroxycobalamin, it's for DNA formation. And then you have adenosylcobalamin, which is for energy. So B12, in fact, the MTRR gene is the one that makes B12. And it depends on what the body needs, goes through the enzymes, change the formulation of the B12, and it uses up. So again, you have to think all the time of nutrients to be utilized by the body as it requires. Therefore, when you do genetic test and somebody tells you have to take B12, then you have another test that tells you B12 is not good for you. How is that possible? That is because it's not very clearly indicated that maybe you need methylcobalamin and hydroxycobalamin. So it really depends on the issue, the symptoms, and what are you measuring. Yeah?
Sorry, this is starting to be why I'm not sure that. What would you call these tests, just for the layperson?
Oh, the first one is the GI map, gastrointestinal microbial assay plus. The hormonal one is the Rhythm Plus. It's a saliva test that the person collects 28 saliva sample, one a day. Then we have the organic acid test from Great Plains Laboratory. Dutch test, it's adrenal and sex hormone. And then the genetics, they vary. Every company really has a genetic profile, so. Questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.